Good morning, DawgNation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp, jam-packed as you would expect. Really good interview later on today with Jake Fromm. I know it's good because we've already recorded it. Jake gets into a lot of some of the questions that all of you have had about the Georgia offense and what it's going to take on Saturday. We'll do that. Also, our good friend and the terrific analyst Terrence Edwards stops by today there as well. I know it's a busy week for Terrence. A lot of high school football coaches in our state trying to figure out how weather is going to impact them here this weekend. So we're thankful to have some of Terrence's time today, given all of that is going on. I have noticed what I think is a little bit of a commonality in some of the big wins that Kalen DeBoer has gotten in his coaching career here thus far. Obviously, all of these coming before he got to Alabama. I think it gives us some insight into what Georgia perhaps needs to do on Saturday to make sure they're on the right side of the final score. But to begin with, national media doing what the national media does, I think pushing a narrative, at times trying maybe too hard on this, about so-called pressure on Kirby Smart and Georgia on Saturday. We'll try to separate fact from fiction here coming up. We're glad to have you with us as we do. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at georgiadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Let me warn you as we begin, for whatever reason, I'm in a little bit of a bad mood today. I may be somewhat on edge for our program. It's got nothing to do with any of you, and obviously I'm still thrilled about Georgia, Alabama on Saturday. I think for me, some of this relates to, I was kind of excited about this week, looking forward to the Braves-Mets series. That's a big deal. We've had 2 of those games now canceled because of weather. We have a really good game on Friday on TV, Peachtree Sports Network. Elijah Griffin getting a chance to showcase him to a television audience. Right now, we kind of don't know the status of that game given the weather. We're hopeful that it can be played, but honestly, we don't know as I sit here and talk to you on Thursday morning. And so, this is one of those great sporting weeks in Georgia. Falcons have 2 interesting games, Sunday to Sunday, kind of bookending it all. Braves playing their most important games. Obviously, Georgia, Alabama is a huge deal, and a lot of that has been impacted here by the weather. Our kids had some stuff they were looking forward to this week. That's kind of gotten messed up. So weather's been a little bit of an issue here this week, and obviously we hope, in addition to just the inconvenience of it all, pretty serious stuff kind of rolling through here. So hopefully all of you are kept safe and that you're able to maintain electricity and all the things that go along with that. Obviously, there's a very serious part of this, but there is also an extent to which it's kind of impacted our sporting week around here. Now, it's not going to have too much of an impact on Saturday, we don't believe, but obviously, it's kind of at least messed up some of the buildup here right now. So maybe that's one of the reasons why I'm in a bad mood today. Now, I am also in probably a little bit of a bad mood because, look, I'm a part of the media. I'm not really a reporter, of course, but I am part of the media. And so if I'm going to come on here and say the media is dumb, then I have to probably acknowledge at times maybe I do some kind of dumb things too, and certainly probably say some dumb things. When you talk as much as I have for as many years as I've been doing it, I'm sure there's a long list of very, very dumb things that I've probably said. I'm sure there's somebody somewhere keeping a list of all this stuff to kind of throw back at me at some point in time. But even though I'm probably at times culpable myself of some pretty dumb stuff, I think the build-up to Georgia, Alabama for this particular week is just some of the dumbest stuff I've ever seen. And I'm sorry. It is just low information, low IQ, claptrap, just like the absolute, kind of bottom of the barrel in terms of analysis about how this game is going to go down on Saturday. And legitimately, I feel like the outcome is in doubt. Georgia could win. Georgia might not win. Alabama's got some things they can do that make them dangerous. There's some things Alabama we still don't quite know. I think there's a way to have a pretty interesting conversation about Georgia, Alabama. We're going to try to do that here in just a few minutes. I don't think the media, by and large, though, is trying hard enough here on this. And I think that in the absence of what I feel like is a real and substantive conversation, they're just kind of leaning into what almost just sort of feels like superstitious nonsense about somehow there's a hex on Georgia because of the Alabama uniform, and that somehow this is a thing that Georgia has to collide with on Saturday. I don't think there's any place for this in a legitimate discussion about the game. I don't say that because I get my feelings hurt easily. Frankly, I don't. I don't say that because I know for a fact who's going to win Saturday's game. I've tried to make it clear, and including just a couple of seconds ago, that I think there's some real intrigue about how this could play out. But I do know this. Some of the stuff that's being said right now is just flat wrong. I want to start with Greg McElroy. McElroy is not a guy that I dislike. In fact, I think that McElroy, despite his kind of Alabama heritage here, is someone who's becoming a pretty good analyst overall on TV, and he may be destined to be like the top analyst once Kirk Herbstreit sort of gets tired of doing 16 different jobs and dragging a dog all over the country. McElroy may be the guy one of these days that's sort of, at the top of the college football food chain when it comes to analyst work. So I don't have any real heat with McElroy necessarily, but I did think that he contributed to this sort of silly notion on Saturday. There's somehow this like insurmountable level of pressure on Georgia ahead of Saturday's game. Relatively short clip, but here's McElroy from his podcast, Always College Football, this week, kind of pushing that as an idea.
I happen to think it's a weird situation in which I feel like Bama's playing with house money a bit, and all the pressure's kind of on Georgia because, hey, you had the whole notion like, oh, Saban's there, Saban's the best ever. Well, Saban's now left, and if you get beat by Kalen DeBoer, you can no longer point to, oh, well, it was just Saban that had our numbers.
All of the pressure is on Georgia. So in this big game where Alabama's the home team, where both teams have playoff aspirations, and I think both teams would like to think of themselves as national championship contenders, somehow it's only Georgia that has pressure in this particular game. And somehow if Georgia were to lose to Alabama on Saturday, now it's not just a problem for Kirby Smart against Nick Saban, but somehow this color of crimson or this style of helmet with the number on the side, that somehow there's magical powers in the way that Alabama dresses that prevents Georgia from being able to win? Like, does anybody other than the most superstitious person in the world believe anything like that? And frankly, I believe that Greg McElroy is smarter than that. I do. I legitimately think that he is capable of better analysis than that. I just think that's pretty weak. But he's not the only one sort of talking that way. Another guy, different network, Joel Klatt, once again. I don't dislike Klatt. I mean, I think we've got a relatively good handful of analysts in college football right now that I think are additive typically to the overall conversation. But the same, type of like just silly, superstitious nonsense that McElroy is pushing, I think that Joel Klatt this week is sort of kind of pushing the same type of thing. That somehow there's like this mystical wall that's kind of, blocked Kirby Smart from achieving that. Somehow there's a hex or a jinx or something like that Alabama is capable of putting on Kirby Smart. Here's Joel Klatt saying some of the same stuff that Greg McElroy did.
If Kirby Smart were to actually lose this game on Saturday, that's actually a giant issue because it goes from a Nick Saban problem that Kirby Smart had to an Alabama problem that he still has.
Now, Joel Klatt says giant issue if Georgia loses on Saturday. Now, I do believe a Georgia loss on Saturday would create some issues. We're going to talk about that here coming up in a couple of seconds. But this idea that Kirby Smart has got an Alabama problem because he went on the road as a less than field goal favorite and somehow didn't win the game, and so therefore he's got an Alabama problem. And all of a sudden, Kirby Smart's time at the top of the college football world with 2 national championships, something that Alabama, frankly does not have in this decade anyway, that somehow Kirby Smart's got an Alabama problem. Now, let me tell you what this reminds me of a little bit, and some of you will remember this. Do you remember prior to the 2021 season, there was all this chatter, we pushed back on it at the time. There was all this chatter about, well, if Kirby Smart doesn't win a national championship this year, when is he going to do it? Is it now or never for Kirby Smart? Some of the same sort of stuff about what was said back then and the people trying to construct a narrative that the clock was ticking against Kirby Smart are somehow now trying to do the same thing with this, that basically if you lose to Kalen DeBoer in your first game against DeBoer, that suddenly your time as like the top coach in college football could be short-lived. Now, admittedly, I have myself also said that Saban's retirement does seem to create a pretty clear path for Georgia, and it would be wise and smart to leverage that to his benefit as much as he possibly can. So there's at least one element of this that's perhaps true. But the theme here that I can't quite get over, and it's just like the stuff that existed prior to the 2021 season, is this thought that somehow Kirby Smart is only a short-term problem for the rest of college football to deal with. And this is probably thin-skinned on my part. This is probably something that I noticed because this is the team we have a tendency to fixate on. But it just always seems like when the media wants to push something about Georgia, and really in particular Kirby Smart, there always seems to be this kind of wishful thinking baked into the discussion that somehow the intensity that Kirby has brought to Georgia, and therefore that Georgia has brought to the rest of college football, is only a short-term condition that need be endured for a little while, and then it's magically going to go away. In other words, going into the 2021 season, Kirby Smart had only been Georgia coach for a handful of years. I think a lot of people were really hopeful. Well, gosh, if he doesn't win one this year, maybe he just goes away, and maybe we don't have to worry about this level of relentless recruiting, unbridled physicality, the kinds of things that make Georgia pretty unpleasant to compete against. Maybe those things will just dissolve. We won't have to worry about those anymore. Wishful thinking that it would be a short-term proposition. Of course, it turned out not to be. Same thing for me is true here right now. This idea of, if Kirby Smart doesn't win on Saturday, then all of a sudden he's got an Alabama problem. And maybe Georgia's not going to be at the top of the college football world as much as we thought they were supposed to be, or that maybe Georgia itself thinks it's supposed to be. Once again, I believe that to be kind of wishful thinking, that somehow magically Georgia's just going to dissolve and go away, and that somehow Kirby Smart's not going to be as much of a bully on the rest of college football for as long as it seems like he might. There's just something really unpleasant about that for a lot of people, it seems, and it seems like there's always a certain level of wishful thinking that somehow this is just going to magically go away, when time and time again that's proven not to be the case. Even after the 2021 national championship, there was some of that of, well, you may have won this one, but good luck winning it next year when Alabama brings back Bryce Young and brings back all whatever, Will Anderson, and Georgia went out to prove to have even more staying power. And that's kind of been the story over and over again. But that's not the only kind of example of sort of dumb stuff out there right now. Believe it or not, it actually gets even worse. Another guy sort of pushing the pressure mantra here this week, the pressure narrative of, oh, gosh, Kirby Smart's got more to prove in this game than Kalen DeBoer's got to prove, even though we don't even know how DeBoer's going to hold up against an SEC schedule. This is literally his first SEC game. But another guy who's pushing the same sort of stuff, not the first time he's pushed an idiotic narrative, is Paul Finebaum. Of course, you know who he is. He goes on, Get Up, the ESPN show this week? Now, he's another one of these guys that has said this week, boy, if you got to ask him tough questions if Kirby Smart doesn't beat Alabama or whatever that he said. But I want you to listen to how flatly wrong, measurably inaccurate, easily falsifiable Paul Finebaum's take on Georgia-Alabama is. I think this goes beyond just being an opinion, the kind of thing that anybody can have, to being an outright factual inaccuracy. Tell me if you agree after you hear this Finebaum from ESPN this week.
Going into the season, I, like you, thought Georgia would be a much bigger favorite, but they have played poorly, nearly losing to Kentucky. Alabama has looked great, and DeBoer has had a seamless transition, which is almost inconceivable considering he was replacing Nick Saban, but he's done almost everything right.
So Kalen DeBoer's done almost everything right, despite the fact that he's played Western Kentucky, South Florida, and Wisconsin. And somehow Alabama has played great, even though if you watch the Alabama-South Florida game, they really almost lost that game. And certainly there was a moment in which it seemed like they might. Georgia, on the other hand, to hear Paul Finebaum tell it, has been what? He says they've played poorly, despite the fact they beat a ranked Clemson team 34-3. For my money, it's probably still the best win anyone's gotten in the country thus far this year. The thorough domination of that opponent that's played very well since then. But somehow Finebaum either doesn't seem to know about that, doesn't seem to remember it. He says that Georgia's played poorly, Alabama's played great. And y'all, this week, that's what's passing for expert analysis. Now, I don't deny this. Paul Finebaum is a prominent voice. And the things that he says gets a lot of attention in the sort of the world of the SEC, Georgia fans, non-Georgia fans alike, whether you like him or not. Finebaum's words carry a lot of weight. But I think a statement like that sort of proves that Finebaum doesn't know anything about college football that's not written down on a sheet of paper in front of him. He's literally reading from a script, and apparently he had the wrong script when he talked about that. And he goes on, these shows up in New York for ESPN because sometimes it sort of feels like he's sort of a northerner's idea of what a southerner should be. And he goes up there and says stuff that I think is just sort of provably false. And it kind of gets baked into what I think is a fairly inaccurate level of analysis going into this game on Saturday. Listen, I hope Georgia doesn't lose, but if they do lose, they're not going anywhere. There's not some sort of superstitious hex on Georgia moving forward. It'll just be a tough loss and a tough road environment, the kind of thing that teams are capable of suffering if they play as difficult a schedule as Georgia's playing this year. I think the better analysis on this probably came from David Pollack, who did happen to be on Greg McElroy's show this week. I think that David did a pretty good job of centering in on what the actual pressure on Georgia really is. That it's not just, if you can't beat Alabama, what does that say about you? Well, the people doing the saying, I don't have a ton of respect for them, so I don't really care what they say. I think that what David Pollack zeroes in on, for what you want to accomplish this year, a loss against Alabama would create pressure on you going forward during this season. I think that's true. I think that Pollack's right for saying it. Here is Pollack, I would say, adding a more realistic appraisal of the accurate nature of the situation, also from the Greg McElroy podcast. Here's David Pollack.
Georgia's going to be very interesting to me. Their schedule sucks. And we've talked about this all year long, dude. I don't care. The best team in the country, you can give me the best team last year or the last 10 years, are going to lose at least one game with their schedule. So if this is the one you choose to lose, you still play at Texas. You still play at Ole Miss. You still host Tennessee. So I think this is an important game. Listen, I don't think Alabama's schedule by any means is easy, but compared to Georgia's, it's pretty easy.
So I think that's good analysis. That Alabama does, I would say, have an easier schedule than Georgia going forward. Georgia's got road games, the likes of which at Ole Miss and certainly Texas, that there is additional pressure on Georgia this season if it were to lose on Saturday. But this idea that it says something negative about Georgia going forward, listen, people wish it was that easy. People wish that Georgia was going to sacrifice itself at the top of the college ball pecking order that quickly and that easily. And obviously we don't think that's going to happen. But the overall bottom line is this, and I'm going to wrap it up and talk about something different. There's a weird paradox in college football that big games like this bring in extra fans that don't watch a lot of other games. Obviously, all of you are kind of plugged in and watch everything all the time. But there's an extent to which a game like this brings in extra folks that are sort of more casual in their fandom, and they sort of show up only for the big games. They have a lot less information at their disposal about college football. So the paradox that's created is sometimes the better the game, the worse the analysis leading up to the game actually is, because it's catering to sort of a low information version of college football fan. I think there's a lot of that out there here this week. And that's not me in a roundabout way of saying, these people aren't giving Georgia enough credit. They don't realize that Georgia's going to win. If you've listened to me closely this week, you haven't heard me say that yet. But this idea that somehow Georgia's hexed because of the Alabama uniform, even though Nick Saban's not the coach, the ghost of Nick Saban somehow still plagues Georgia. Or if Georgia loses, they're never going to win another national championship. Or somehow Alabama has been better than Georgia here this year. That's the sort of easily falsifiable, factually inaccurate, frankly just stupid stuff that caters to the sort of low information casual fan that stumbles into the sport during a week like this. Obviously, all of you are better than that. We're trying to give you a better overall discussion, but it's still sometimes important to let you know what others are saying, and we've tried to do that right there. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. Glad you are with us, whether it's video, 10 a.m., radio, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcast, everything else. Thrilled to have you. as a part of the program. And our great friends at Meriwether and Tharp are also big sponsors for our DawgNation Invasion, are bringing the show to us here today. Now, listen, the divorce process is truly scary and confusing. I don't dispute that. We love talking college football. Even when I'm in a bad mood, I still love talking about college football. But I also know that for some of you, the college football conversation is a little bit difficult to have right now because you're thinking about much more serious things. You're thinking about a divorce that maybe you've tried to pretend wasn't on the horizon for you, or maybe you've even worked to try to prevent it from happening. But now, because of the circumstances of your specific situation, it's just the obvious next step. If that's the case, then of course you've got questions, because this is one of those things that your neighbor may have gone through, or your cousin may have gone through, but until you're the one that's going through it, you just think about things that you perhaps never thought about before. So if you've got questions about the divorce process, Meriwether and Tharp has those answers, and you get a chance to have a sit down with one of their attorneys, free initial consultation, talk through your divorce questions and let them listen. And frankly, sometimes it's just sort of nice to have someone to listen to your story. They will listen to your story, and then I think you'll make the decision to hire them as your divorce attorney, and then they'll walk with you through this process. Now, the good thing is, when we first started with Meriwether and Tharp years ago, they were making a name for themselves because of the work they were doing to help folks here in the Atlanta area. That's where we broadcast from every day. But their track record of success has frankly made them famous. And so therefore now the service they provided to folks in Atlanta for a long time, now that's out there for the entire state of Georgia there too. Offices, Athens, Peachtree City, Carrollton, Savannah, like all over the place. They either have offices or have offices coming soon. And that's a great opportunity for you because we have folks all across the state that are listening to us right now. And so there very well may be a Meriwether and Tharp attorney near you that you can talk to and kind of have these conversations that you need to have. So please find them online. It's GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. That is GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. Meriwether and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce. All right, speaking of our DawgNation Invasion, I'm going to give you a little bit more on that here coming up in just a moment. Prior to that, though, I do want to go around the doghouse here just for a minute. And we're going to try to have a better conversation about Georgia-Bama than perhaps is being reflected in the national media here right now. And a lot of this, because he's probably just the more famous coach, as we talked about a moment ago, a lot of this has sort of centered around Kirby Smart. But I want to put the spotlight for a moment on the other coach in this game, Kalen DeBoer. And I've told you, as a Georgia partisan, obviously I want Georgia to win this game. I've had sort of this sort of wishful thinking mindset of, well, maybe DeBoer would do something on Saturday, or maybe Alabama through some sort of sloppy play. Maybe they'd do something on Saturday that kind of reminds you that Nick Saban isn't coaching the Crimson Tide anymore, and that perhaps the game is maybe just slightly easier because Saban's not there to sort of push the buttons in a game like this the way that he would have done that in the past. Obviously, it's important to note, as I say that DeBoer himself, over the course of his career prior to coming to Alabama, has proven himself to be a pretty successful coach. In fact, this week, Kirby Smart was sort of asked, hey, when did you first notice Kalen DeBoer? How aware were you of this up-and-coming coach while he was up and coming? This is what Kirby Smart said about that this week.
Yeah, I didn't really know who he was until probably when Lanning went to Oregon, and I followed Dan a lot, and they had the big rivalry with them, not really last year, but the year before. I started following Dan, their season. I think that was maybe the year that we had played Dan, and they went on to play Washington, I think, once that year, and then twice the following year. And that's when it started, popping up on my radar because, Washington historically was known for great defense way back when. And he changed that. I mean, not that they weren't good on defense. They were good on defense, but he made them good on offense. And his record speaks for itself. Everywhere he's been successful. I think he's very confident in what he does and his organizational methods, and I think it takes that in the situation he's in. Like the situation he's in, you got to be pretty confident in your own skin to go in there and do things your way, especially with the record they've had. And it seems like he's done that without any issue or problem. I think the smartest thing he's done is he hadn't changed everything. Like, offensively, they have some similarities because they have the same quarterback. And we'll probably see a lot more wrinkles that they haven't shown. But for the most part, they've kept some of the staples that they had last year, because probably makes the quarterback comfortable.
So it's interesting in that comment from Kirby Smart to hear him mention I became more, aware of DeBoer because he was competing against Dan Lanning. So the question was also asked to Kirby this week, well, therefore, have you been in contact with Dan Lanning as a way of maybe getting even more insight into what Kalen DeBoer brings to the table? And Kirby Smart said, yeah, we have been on the phone. We have talked at least a little bit. This is Kirby Smart again.
Yeah, I mean, we do that with everybody that plays against him. We do it with Dan too, but I mean, he didn't have the most success either. So I mean, he's had some tough games and some tough decisions against him, and has a lot of respect for him, just like we do. But we did a lot of that in the offseason. I mean, you talk to people about your future opponents and share ideas and on like opponents.
So let me make a small point here for just a second, which is, I told you before, I'd love for Kalen DeBoer to sort of fall flat on his face on Saturday and just be below the standard of what, an SEC coach is supposed to be. I'd love for that to be true. And maybe that will happen. But when you go back and look, and we try to be as honest as we possibly can, when you go back and look at his time there at Washington, as Kirby Smart points out, some wins against Oregon. Really, in 2 years there at Washington, there are a handful of games that kind of show you that DeBoer as a coach is capable of having success against teams that are at least a little bit similar to what, to what Georgia brings to the table on Saturday. He beat Texas twice, in the College Football Playoff last year and the Alamo Bowl the previous year. Beat Oregon a total of 3 times. And the one thing I noticed from those 5 games, you can go back and look at the box scores yourself. I think the common denominator of those 5 wins, 2 against Texas, 3 against Oregon, similar teams, Texas from a recruiting standpoint, Oregon from a style standpoint because Dan Lanning is their head coach. When you go back and look at that, I think one of the things you see, almost all the games were high scoring and pretty close. And in almost every instance, his quarterback outplayed the guy on the other side. In fact, the only time that you may not say that definitely happened that way was in last year's Pac-12 title game when maybe Bo Nix had the better game compared to Michael Penix. But Penix clearly outplayed Quinn Ewers in last year's College Football Playoff semifinal, and Penix clearly outplayed Bo Nix in last year's regular season meeting between the two, and arguably did that as well in the 2 big games for Washington in 2022. That better quarterback play in a high-scoring and close game was ultimately the difference for the biggest wins that Kalen DeBoer has gotten in his coaching career thus far. I think the analogy for Saturday's game ought to be obvious. We have talked a lot about Carson Beck here today. And before we're done, Jake Fromm has some very interesting things to say about Carson Beck and what he'd like to see from Carson coming out on Saturday. It's a great interview with Jake a little bit later on. But when you look at the previous track record of Kalen DeBoer, the biggest wins that he's gotten, quarterback play in kind of a high-scoring, close game has been a big difference maker. All the more reason you need Carson Beck at his best there on Saturday night. And that is Around the Doghouse here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. Okay, I want to tell you more about our DawgNation invasion stuff coming up. Maybe a last-minute push there for you there on that. But without further ado, I want to jump into our next guest here, keeping the conversation going. What can we expect on Saturday? How does Georgia get it done? What does Alabama bring to the table? Let's have a great discussion right now with a terrific coach of the Mount Vernon team here in the Atlanta area, former Georgia wide receiver, big presence around the sport of football, Terrence Edwards here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Running late, and I apologize for that, but excited to bring Terrence Edwards into the discussion here right now. Terrence, I was just saying, and first of all, thank you for being with us here. I know that's a chaotic week for many Georgia high school football coaches, battling weather, trying to figure out how that's going. Are you guys postponed for Friday, by the way? I know there is a lot of postponements that are out there right now.
Not as of yet, but we have made plans just in case.
Yeah, a lot of coaches having to kind of make those alternate plans, especially when there's travel involved. So to all of our coaches who are maybe listening and watching us right now, y'all stay safe. And obviously we know what a challenge all of this is for all of you. But I was just talking about, you go back and look at DeBoer, 2 years at Washington. That's 3 wins against Oregon. That's 2 wins against Texas. They played him in bowl games twice. And in almost every one of those games, his guy, Michael Penix, outplayed the very good quarterback on the other side, especially in last year's College Football Playoff semifinal. I thought that Penix was much better than Quinn Ewers. the regular season game. Penix much better than Bo Nix, and arguably this was also true in some of the other games as well, perhaps with the exception of last year's Pac-12 title game. So to me, that puts a lot of spotlight on Carson Beck to go out there and kind of, it's not a one-on-one battle because they're on the field at the same time, but it is sort of that sort of gunslinger matchup type thing. I think that Beck's really got to be better than McElroy on Saturday. Do you think he can be?
I do. I think he can be. I have a lot of respect for Jalen McElroy and his ability to lead his team. He's 1-0 against Georgia right now as a starter, so he's very confident in his ability to beat Georgia. So I think Carson has to take the personal challenge of just not trying to beat Jalen McElroy, but just trying to play the best football that he can play to put his team in position to win. I don't think he's satisfied with his play so far. And this is a game that he could really, I'm going to say have that breakout game, but have that game that really solidifies him as the Georgia top contending Heisman Trophy candidate, probably a first-round pick quarterback. And I think this is the game that he can really do that.
And to me, and obviously it's hard for me to put my head space in the mindset of a guy like Carson Beck because, honestly, I just don't have those physical capabilities. So I don't know what it feels like to be Carson Beck. I can only guess about that. But this is one of those deals where, everybody talks about his cool, calm demeanor. Kirby Smart talks about that. Sometimes Carson's very cool, doesn't get too high, doesn't get too low. That probably helps him in a game like this, right? I mean, as an athlete, you kind of remind me of someone who would not really get too high, not really get too low. You're always pretty even-keeled. That's one of the reasons why I like talking to you, because you're always, fairly consistent with your mood and your attitude. I'm guessing that probably helped you as a football player. And in the case of Carson Beck, that's the way that he's been described. That probably does help him a little bit on Saturday, right?
It is very similar to David Green.
Yeah.
David was the same way as well. You would never see him, his emotions very much, good or bad. He could give that fist pump at times, but you can never see any frustration on his face. And I think Carson is very similar. I think that's a good thing because he now allows the defense not to know if we're getting to him, because once defenses knows that we have him, they're going to continue to talk. They're going to continue to hit him. They're going to continue to try to frustrate him. If they see no frustration, they don't know if they're doing a good job trying to get into his head. So I think he's in a really good headspace as a football player. I think he's going to come out and be the best version of himself and play a great game on Saturday.
Moving on to the two coaches here, a lot's been said this week about the fact that, obviously Kirby Smart doesn't just have a winning record. He has almost a perfect record against almost any slice of a schedule you could dice up. Road games, home games, ranked opponents. I mean, he just rarely loses. And yet he's obviously collected a handful of losses against Alabama. I don't deny that's an interesting stat, just given how much it stands out from the rest of what's happened here. But I do think there's been an attempt to sort of make it something that it's not and somehow, act like there's some sort of mental block for Georgia in a game like this. I mean, I think that Georgia could lose, but I don't think that there's some sort of like hex or jinx that will be the reason if it were to occur. On the flip side, you've got a Kalen DeBoer who I don't think gets enough attention. As I try to talk about, he's doing all of this for the first time on Saturday. And listen, he had great success at Washington, but frankly, the Pac-12 is a league that doesn't exist anymore. So, the idea that gives you a huge resume in a game like this, I'm not quite so sure that it does. To me, DeBoer has a lot to prove. Not to say that he hasn't proven anything as a coach. He wouldn't have the Alabama job if it were not for some previous success. So with that kind of as the backdrop, Kirby the veteran, DeBoer sort of the up-and-comer here, which of these two coaches do you think is facing the most pressure on Saturday?
I think it's Kirby. I think it's Kirby that's facing the most pressure because he's the most veteran coach. I think if Georgia wins, it's Kirby because he does have 2 national championships up on his belt. And if DeBoer loses, he's the least experienced of the two in the SEC. So he's kind of playing with house money. But at the end of the day, it's still Alabama. They still have the players. They still have tradition. They still have the lure of that program has been the big bad bullies on the block. So I think Coach Smart going very confident. I think he goes into every game confident that his team is going to win. And at the end of the day, it's all about the players. Coaches can't play anymore. It's about the players going in there who execute the game plan the best. And that's what it's going to come down to is coaches can't play, players have to play.
I mean, I do think that, as I said a moment ago, from the parameters of this season, I do think a loss would maybe be more meaningful than Georgia than Alabama because, Alabama starts the year, preseason number 5 or something like that. So they're, based on that preseason ranking, their only goal would be to make the playoff, right? I mean, and then you see what happens once you get there. And obviously they could easily overcome one loss and still make the playoff. And as I believe it was David Pollack who pointed out earlier in a clip that we played, their schedule is probably easier than Georgia's is going forward. On the other hand, Georgia starts off preseason number 1. And by losing, you're sort of giving back some of that top 4 status. Now you're kind of putting yourself more in the middle of the pack of the so-called playoff contenders. And, oh, yeah, by the way, with a loss already on your resume, going to Texas, playing Tennessee, going to Ole Miss, all of a sudden you run the risk of having to play a game later on this season where it is now must win. And if you don't win this, you may not make the college football playoff. So while I don't necessarily buy some of what the national media is saying about the long-term ramifications of a Georgia loss, Terrence, the one thing I don't deny is that Georgia would certainly make its remainder of the season much more difficult if it did give up a loss this early. Still in September, to lose a game now would certainly make the rest of the year pretty challenging.
I think so. I agree with that to a standpoint that if, Georgia somehow loses this game and the rest of the opponents that we have is not necessarily, it's a must win, I would say. We can't go into, Austin with a loss to Alabama and then lose to Texas and lose to Tennessee and possibly lose to Ole Miss. And I know we have 12 teams in the playoffs, but that would be very hard to justify putting Georgia into the 12 teams with 4 losses. So yeah. I think, every game means a lot, especially if trying to get an opportunity to get that bye. That bye is probably going to be worth more than gold because you get a break at the end of the season where you can get guys healthy. So these games are very important. I think a lot of people have lost faith in these games with meaning. Nowadays, it definitely means more to me because you never know with this type schedule. You got to go and play every game or you won't see yourself in a 12-team playoff.
All right, so let's finish with this conversation. And your opinion on this matters because you've called some of this stuff so correctly before. So I've said I think Georgia needs 30-something points on Saturday to win, which means, as we talked about earlier, it means a big day from Carson Beck. But it also means someone's got to be on the receiving end, no pun intended, of those Beck throws. So if Georgia gets the big point total on Saturday, if Carson Beck wins the, for lack of a better phrase, duel against Jalen Milroe, who are the guys or maybe the guy that you really view as the sort of hero that breaks out in a game like this? Do you have 1 or 2 names on your mind right now?
I'm going to go, and I'm not saying this because he wears number 8. I'm saying it Kobe Young because of his ability to catch back shoulders, his ability to high point the football because of his height. And I just think he's a fantastic receiver that we may and hopefully get him more involved in this offense. If you haven't seen him in person, he's all of 6'4", 6'5", 215 pounds. And I just think his size is going to bring a problem to a lot of opponents. So I'm going to just call out Kobe Young, not just because he wears number 8, because his abilities as a receiver as well.
Well, I think you're bringing up a really good point. I mean, obviously we've seen, Colby get a couple of touchdowns already this year, and perhaps, as you said, also kind of hoping for more from him on Saturday. I think it kind of touches on, man, if you can get into the red zone, the scoring area, if you can get inside the 20, finding a way to finish off those drives, not having to settle for field goals, such a big thing. And I know Kirby Smart has said they didn't target Colby specifically because of his, size and his red zone kind of abilities, but gosh, that was the first thing that fans noticed. And so far, that's kind of what he's been. And to have a guy like that, it's almost like you can have a good defense against him or maybe have the right, coverage, and yet Young can just go get the football. And to have a guy who can just go get it in a situation like that, perhaps finishing off scoring chances on Saturday, not settling for three. Man, that could be a really good recipe on the road, right?
Most definitely. And you have to score points. We're going down to T-Town, as they call it. Like, we can't settle for field goals. Of course, we always want to score points. But to really beat Alabama and Jalen Milroe with his ability to run the football and now his ability to throw the football downfield with a lot of accuracy, we're going to have to score points. And it's going to take more than 28 probably to win this game. And I think the Dogs are going to be up for it. And I think they've heard for, 8 to 10 days now of how the offense didn't produce and how now it's still time to fire Bobo. And I think everyone is going to get, their opportunity to prove people wrong that this offense is just as good, if not as better than last year or the previous years. But they have to go out there and show it, and this is a good opportunity to show everyone on the national stage.
Give me one final thing, if you don't mind, before we let you go. I just heard Kirby Smart in a clip we played a little earlier saying that he thinks that DeBoer's probably got some offensive wrinkles that they're saving. I'm going to talk to Jake Fromm about that topic a little bit later on, too. A guy for me that I hope maybe Georgia's kind of saved a little bit. It's a guy that you've touted before. I want to see more of Dillon Bell on Saturday. How do you think that maybe Georgia could get Dillon more involved in the offense than maybe he's been thus far this season?
Yeah, I just think you got to be very you just got to get him the ball in different ways. Jet sweeps, corner screens, put him in the backfield. Like, you just got to get him to ball because he is a playmaker in space. So I would like to see Dillon Bell get more opportunities in this game because good things happen when you target that young man. However kind of way you want to get him the ball, he needs the opportunity to showcase his skill set on Saturday.
Terrence, fantastic stuff. I appreciate your insight as always. I know what a crazy week this is for anybody who's working in education just because of schools canceled, schools not canceled, after school activities. I mean, we got people in our audience, including my own family here, who are trying to scramble with all this here right now. So we appreciate that. Remind folks how they can connect with you online. Terrence Edwards, Wide Receiver Academy. You're tweeting during the games. You're working out with folks. You got guys playing at the next level, obviously doing great stuff. So for people who want more of you in the Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy, how can they get that?
You can find me on all social media platforms at Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy.
Terrence, I love it. Best of luck to you guys this weekend, both in terms of staying safe and if you get the chance to play. And we'll obviously look forward to talking to you here on DawgNation Daily again very soon as well.
Thank you.
Good stuff.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Could be somewhat interesting to watch Georgia, first 10, 15 plays, whatever. Those what we kind of commonly think of as the scripted plays. Georgia's play script's usually pretty good at the start of a game. I know they've gotten off slow starts, but in games like this, they usually have, pretty sharp collection of plays in place. Could be a little bit of an insight into who they want to get involved early. Watch who touches it. Watch who's targeted, maybe even. And that could be at least somewhat, insightful in terms of, what Georgia thinks its offensive strengths are. Perhaps that could be worth monitoring. Now, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean, and let's talk about Utopia of the Seas, because when it's bad weather and raining and all that kind of stuff and, starting to get, at some point in time, cold, y'all know I don't like the cold weather. My blood, I just think, is made for the warmer, places. I just need to be where it's warm. And so that is what Utopia of the Seas provides, both when you get to destinations like Perfect Day Coco Cay, and I do love the fact that every single one of those Utopia of the Seas itineraries takes you to Perfect Day Coco Cay. But when it comes to a great ship like Utopia, the ship itself is a destination. If you're watching a video, we're looking at the Boardwalk neighborhood there. You've heard me talk before about Playmaker Sports Bar and Grill. That is found in the Boardwalk neighborhood. So it's like a Coney Island boardwalk. And you got the Playmakers, which has like all like the wings, the nachos, obviously tons of beer. And you can, sit out in the kind of the patio area there. And it's just it's a true sports bar experience, but it's like right there on the ship. You've also got the Aqua Theater there, the kind of the world-class entertainment for which Royal Caribbean's famous for. And by the way, I heard this. I think this is, I don't think I'm supposed to say this yet. Royal Caribbean loves to have like the Broadway style shows on their ships. For one of the newest ships, I'm not supposed to say this, I don't think, but they have a really cool, like never before seen type concept coming for one of these brand new ships. So I'll tell you more about that if I get the green light to do so. But Royal Caribbean is always just sort of pushing the envelope, making the experience entertainment-wise and everything else as great as it possibly can be. Jessica Slater can tell you more about it. Give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. All right, let's talk here for a moment. A couple of stories. Bear Alexander back in the transfer portal again. And listen, hopefully we have a reputation around here. We're not just like dragging players through the mud. Even when players do not so great things, we just have a tendency to sort of tread lightly on that particular topic. It's our style. Frankly, it's not everybody's style. It's not Hugh Freeze's style. But that's just sort of our house style around here. Is we're not going out there ripping players all the time because I think it's kind of gross. I'm old enough to be these guys' dads, and I'm just not going to do that. So I'm not going to do this to Bear Alexander either. But I do think it is fair to point out that if you're not careful, you will become a cautionary tale. Because coaches are always looking for something to motivate their players and help train up their players. And frankly, parents are doing this kind of thing too. And as someone who has a son and a daughter and is constantly talking to them about what I think they need to be doing in life, y'all, I'm not afraid to use a cautionary tale. In a private conversation with one of my kids, I'm not afraid to say, do you want to be like so-and-so? Do you want to end up like so-and-so? Well, then make a different decision about whatever that might be. I'm not afraid to do that. And you don't want to be the kind of person that becomes someone else's cautionary tale. But many do. Bear Alexander, unfortunately, has. This is a guy who came out of high school as a premier prospect and, frankly, showed some of that promise at Georgia. When he left, I know there's this narrative that addition by subtraction and Georgia was better without him. There are a few folks in that building who didn't feel that way, and I'm fairly confident in my opinion on that, even though obviously not everybody apparently loved him. But there are a few folks who obviously recognized his ability as an interior pass rusher, and we're not exactly thrilled to see him go because you never love to see talent walking out of the door. So Alexander, highly rated prospect, demonstrated some of that in his 1 year at Georgia, and has just sort of been on a milk carton ever since then. And it's just a real shame. And this is the thing that I sort of hate about this era of college football that we're living in. A lot of people who advocate for all the change that exists around college football do so under the guise of they want to be pro-player. They want a system in place that benefits the players and harms the coaches. That's what they think is better. And they are so invested in sowing this chaos that they don't always acknowledge that guys like Alexander fall through the cracks because of the system that we currently have in place. Kids don't oftentimes need more freedom. They need more structure. And the absence of structure around college football has caused Alexander to fall through the cracks. I think, transferring again certainly doesn't speak very well of what his football future perhaps is going to be. And ultimately, that's Bear's responsibility. It's not the system's responsibility. But when people kind of tout and advocate for a system that's so-called good for players, my question is always, well, which players? And how many of those players? Is it the majority of players? We're never quite so sure about that. But obviously, Bear, a lot of freedom of movement, a lot of movement, looking for a new home, and unfortunately a little bit of a cautionary tale, and we'll always, if things continue on the path they are right now, we'll certainly be left to wonder what could have been. We've talked about Tennessee a lot on the show the last few weeks, and I think we've tried to do this in a responsible manner. I do think Tennessee's good. As I've told you before, the absolute truth in life is never 100% of what you want it to be. Georgia fans love the fact that they are a top-ranked team. They love the fact that rivals like Auburn and Florida have certainly fallen on hard times. But all of your rivals can't be equally down bad at the same time. And in the case of Tennessee, they're probably not. They're probably, I would say, a pretty formidable challenge. I think that's a fairly responsible way to talk about what Tennessee is right now. Obviously, there's always going to be people who sort of push that to the next level. So we're Colin Cowherd. And I probably actually like Colin a little bit more than some of y'all do because, blowhards who scream into a microphone for hours on end, we probably have to stick together a little bit. So I probably like Colin a little more than some of y'all do. But Colin Cowherd, I guess, has predicted Tennessee to win the national championship now. Even Greg McElroy was sort of talking about the idea they could win the whole thing here. So we kind of go from, you know what, Tennessee's probably improved. This is probably the best version of Tennessee under Josh Heupel. That's a fair thing to say. All of a sudden, now it's national championship or bust for the Vols. That's probably taking it too far. So once again, sometimes it's just our job to let you know what's out there. And so people are now kind of taking the Tennessee hype to an insane level with the idea that maybe they could win the national championship here this year. So tread lightly when it comes to all this, I reckon. One final thing here, and I'll mention this briefly, and then we'll get to Jake Fromm. So Sluka, the UNLV quarterback, we've got more details coming out about this, where you've got both sides, kind of sort of digging into their corners here. UNLV, the official statement coming from them is, and we told you about this story yesterday, he's opting out of the rest of the season because he says he was promised $100,000. UNLV didn't pay, and so therefore he's not playing. UNLV has had the statement, something to the effect of, well, gosh, we had never promised that. That'd be an improper benefit. That's against NCAA rules. That's pay for play, which is, I would say, fairly ludicrous. Also, the fact that Sluka is so sure that he was promised all this when nothing exists in writing here, that starts to feel pretty ludicrous too. And I'm starting to sort of feel like every minute we've spent thinking about this story has been probably a waste of time. The truth is, if the kid was worth $100,000, he'd be paid $100,000 somewhere else other than UNLV. The fact that he was willing to take this, not in writing, meant that no one else was able to offer him more or offer him something more tangible. So I sort of don't really view him to be blameless in all of this. I think that UNLV sort of demonstrates itself to sort of be a little bit of a Mickey Mouse program right now. Barry Odom almost certainly is not sticking around here. He's the head coach, the former Missouri coach. He'll have options at the end of the season. He'll almost certainly take one because I think what we're discovering here is that for a long time, the so-called group of five has just sort of been barely holding on, just sort of barely finding a way to continue to exist. But listen, if UNLV football disappeared tomorrow, very few people, east of the Colorado River would notice it or even miss it. It's just not much of a thing. And so I think this week, the real story here is not unkept promises or, selfish players. It's just sort of a sloppy operation. I mean, and I don't wish the group of five to disappear, but it's not real football at the same level of the other conferences. And stories like this, where wild promises are made and gullible players perhaps believe some of that, it just sort of demonstrates just how sloppy of an operation most of the group of five probably is. And we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, before we get to Jake Fromm, let me also remind you, kind of a last call here of sorts. I don't know about travel opportunities here in terms of hotels, things like that. We're obviously kind of last minute on that, but maybe you never know. I am pretty sure, though, that if you still want to be a part of our DawgNation Invasion tailgate, I believe you still have a chance to do that. Seeing us there in Tuscaloosa, the Friday night there in the suburban Birmingham area. A lot of great sponsors making this possible. Our friends at Atlanta Sports Trips, Discover Dunwoody, Dr. Pepper, Meriwether and Tharp, Kroger, and R.S. Andrews. Of course, a great group of all kinds of terrific folks there on that. If you go to DawgNation.com/tailgate, you can get more information. DawgNation.com/tailgate. Secure your tickets. We have a really fun DawgNation Invasion t-shirt. We're going to see those all over Tuscaloosa on Saturday. The Bama folks are going to hate it, and we love it. The Tennessee people last year for our DawgNation Invasion were beside themselves, and it was as bad as they ever thought it would be. The Alabama folks, they're in for a world of hurt on Saturday there, too. We love all of that. Want to see you there. DawgNation.com/tailgate for more information on that. And now, without further ado, what I thought was a terrific conversation with the former quarterback, Jake Fromm, here today, a Kroger Fresh Take on DawgNation Daily. And here on DawgNation Daily, time now for our Kroger Fresh Take as we say hello to the former Georgia quarterback, Jake Fromm. Obviously, Dogs getting ready for a big one there on Saturday. Jake, we always appreciate your insight on things like this. Thank you for joining us on the show here today.
Man, always good coming on the show, Brandon. Thank you for having me.
So I think one of the topics that's out there this week because of the opponent, it's Alabama. Now, Georgia, to its credit, did get over that hump and won the national championship game in 2021 against Alabama. So this idea that UGA can't beat Bama, whether Saban's coaching or not, that all should have been put to rest with that. But there is seemingly a little bit of mystique about this uniform, this opponent, the backstory, the history that even predates you, by the way, kind of comes back to the minds of some fans. So as somebody who played a couple of hard-fought games against Alabama, you guys had a chance to win that 2017 national championship, the 2018 SEC championship. You also won a lot of other big games at Georgia, so perhaps you're capable of making this comparison. Was it different playing Alabama than playing some sort of other opponent that you would have played back during your Georgia career?
Yeah, I mean, to that I would say a little bit of a yes, a little bit of a no. For me personally, they were another really good football team, really no weaknesses anywhere you would see them on defense. The scheme was something I'm used to seeing, throughout practice, throughout the year. A very similar scheme, obviously, that Kirby and Saban both have there on defense. So, a little bit of no there. And then also, like the two experiences that I have in playing Alabama, I mean, we're winning 99% of that game, except, the last play and then, a quick 45-second, 2-minute drive there at the end of the SEC championship game. So, I mean, I feel like I've done everything but beat Alabama except on the scoreboard. I always thought that we, gave it a really good shot when we played them. And, man, I always felt good about those games, except, we lost, really, But, they've gotten over the hump, yes, and have that one win, but still 1-5 against, Alabama and Nick Saban coach football teams. This is going to be a little bit different flavor, but you're still going into Tuscaloosa, playing in Bryant-Denny, very tough place to play, and they have a really good quarterback who can change the game with his legs.
So on the flip side of that, how about Kalen DeBoer now having to coach in his first SEC game? With Nick Saban, who we would all say is one of the all-time greats, on the other sideline, you could never assume you were going to get the mistake from him, some sort of error. You just sort of had to assume the opponent was always going to be at its best. And maybe for Kalen DeBoer on Saturday, that'll be true once again, too. But, man, it's a big spot for him. Well, what do you make of a coach like this who's had success? He had Washington in the playoff a year ago. But what do you make about a guy like this coaching in his first SEC game in such monumental circumstances?
Yeah, this is going to be a big game for him as well. You can kind of look back at his track record last year at Washington, played Oregon very, very well. Dan Lanning using a very similar scheme in Oregon that he used there at Georgia. So he has some experience going against a very similar style of defense. Obviously, different dudes playing the position, but scheme-wise, similar. So he may have an edge in that case. But, man, the lights are still coming on for him as well, just like any young player going and playing in their first SEC game or first road game, whatever. And it's going to be exciting to watch and see kind of his kind of persona throughout the game and see, if he calls it well and does all the things that he needs to do.
So you mentioned being on the road. Your first road start as a quarterback was at Notre Dame, and there were like 40,000 Georgia fans there. Obviously, Carson Beck's been on the road now a pretty good bit. But for Georgia overall, I mean, do you remember the first time you ever encountered, like, true hostility on the road where, man, this 100,000 people, I mean, they really want me to fail right now? And what did that feel like for you and for Georgia players, not quarterback necessarily, but guys who may be going through this for the first time, or in some cases, at least for the first time, not the first time this year because they played Kentucky, but it's a different environment when you talk about Alabama. Yep. What's that like as someone who's kind of been through that?
Yeah, so two games kind of popped to mind. My freshman year going to Tennessee, a very, very loud place, but we jumped on them so early in that game. I don't really feel like I ever got that full effect. However, you can go to the next year in 2018 when we go on the road to LSU. You talk about hostility, a very loud crowd environment, the band playing the song that they have. That was a very, very tough place to play. So I imagine both these being very similar. From my experience going to Bryant-Denny, during the recruiting process, that place gets loud, man. They do it right. They put on a great show, and it's a great atmosphere to play. But Carson and a few guys on the team can go back and grab some experience in 2020 when they went on the road to Bryant-Denny as well. So there's a few veteran guys on the team that can kind of reach back for that experience, and hopefully they use it well.
So we've talked about this before, and I sort of find myself everywhere that I go talking to Georgia fans just in life, right? Just whatever you might be doing. over the course of your time, it comes up with a lot of UGA fans of, what do you think about Carson right now? How do you feel like Carson's playing right now? There's so much scrutiny for the quarterback position. You know that. You've lived that with your whole life. A lot of it, I'm sure, is probably unfair because of the extra attention that position gets. But I have to play into it myself. What do you think about Carson right now? And how do you think he's been playing for Georgia through 3 games thus far this season?
Yeah, I think he's done a really good job of what they've asked him to do. I think last game, he could have been slightly more accurate. Maybe he needed a play here and there. Man, games happen. That stuff happens. Let's, go back to last year versus Auburn when arguably the Dogs should have lost on the road there in Jordan-Hare, but they didn't. They survived. Very similar situation here. And I think they'll move on with some momentum later into the year like they did last year. The talk only gets louder when you have a bye week, right? I'm kind of going back from my experience. 2018, we played LSU, we go to the bye week, and then come back and play Florida. Like, for me, bye weeks were about going to work. The talk gets louder. You're going to know it because they have more to talk about. What else are they going to talk about? Well, they're going to talk about the quarterback and the quarterback play, right? So you just kind of have to turn the brain off, man, go to work, and get ready to show out. So I'm expecting some really big things from Carson. How is he going to respond? He needs to get healthy, get that AC joint kind of, figured out. Man, let's get a shot. Let's go and go out and just go play unconscious football, right? Let's not think. Let's just go do and rip it.
So you mentioned the Florida game in 2018 coming off that bye week, and to me, that was a legacy-defining game for you, one of the best games I think you ever played at Georgia. Did you go, and this is probably a dumb question, but did you go into that game saying, hey, I'm going to go define my legacy today. I'm going to go out there and show the world how good I am? Or did you just sort of approach it the way you would approach any game, and it just so happens that you played well enough to – because a lot of people, remember, you earned the starting quarterback job, at least in my mind, for, the rest of the season and for the rest of your career based on the way you played that day. Did you go into it saying, I'm going to do it, or is that just sort of the way that it happened to play out?
No, I was going into that week, the entire bye week practice. I just remember just practicing – just pissed off. I was just mad at the world, mad at, everybody who's doubting me right now, mad at the coaches, mad at everybody. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go show you guys, because obviously Justin was there, a lot of talk. And I'm like, dude, hey, I'm going to go play, and I'm going to go play great. Thank God I did. Would have been bad if I didn't. But, man, really thankful to go out, play well, trust my guys, and come out with a really defining win there as a team.
Boy, fun thing to think Carson Beck could do the same thing there on Saturday as well. It's our Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm here today on DawgNation Daily. Many of you traveling over to Tuscaloosa on Saturday. Some of you getting settled in to watch the game. Obviously, all of your game day essentials, you get those from Kroger. And the best way to make sure you're fully stocked up is to become a member. Kroger Boost, that's the membership program. So you go shopping, you can take advantage of free grocery delivery. They'll come bring it right to you. You driving around right now trying to save money? How about twice the fuel points on the things you're already buying at your local Kroger? Great way to kind of save money at the pump. Very important in this day and age here right now. All of that, great incentive for you to become a Kroger Boost member. So please find them online. It's Kroger.com/boost. That is Kroger.com/boost for a lot more on that. All right, Jake, if you don't mind, let's finish up with this. One of the things that some fans have also been wondering, too, and this kind of comes up every year, and admittedly, as someone who's not a former coach and not a former player, I don't quite fully always know how this works. But, we haven't seen a ton of, say, Dylan Bell yet. There are these offensive wrinkles that I don't know that we've seen a lot of from Georgia through 3 games. And so the assumption that gets made, especially when it's a somewhat lackluster offensive performance like it was against Kentucky, well, that's okay. Georgia's saving the best plays for the best teams, and that they're only using kind of just enough to win this game, but the better plays in the back of the playbook, they'll get to those for the better opponents. It's one of those things. It comes up every year, and yet as someone who, like I said, doesn't have a background within the sport, I've never really known how true or not that might be. So as someone who knows the playbook as well as could be known as a quarterback, how much of that gets used every game? And is it true that, well, if you've got Alabama coming up in 2 weeks, you're not putting your best stuff on film right before you play them? How true is that?
Yeah, so I would say there's 2 schools of thought on this. one side is, hey, we're going to save our stuff. We know it's really good. We can execute it really well. And when the time comes, we're going to gash them on it. The other school of thought is, hey, man, if it's on the call sheet as a call player, play caller, I'm going to let it rip. And because there's plenty of stuff out there, I'm going to come up with new stuff, and I'm going to give the defense more to look at and more to scheme throughout the week. So those are kind of the two schools of thought. I've always kind of thought of the Georgia style and the Georgia way kind of on offense and maybe Kirby of kind of holding stuff until it's needed. I think that changed a little bit when Monken was calling plays, and I think Monken did a great job of just calling it and letting it rip. But from my experience just watching it, I think they're kind of holding on to a lot of things, a lot of different personnels and formations, maybe a few motions and a few wrinkles. For when it's right, you could probably see some really, really unique stuff on this first drive from Alabama. Coaches love to do that. Get on the pre-call list of what you're going to call in that first drive and get the defensive coordinator freaking out over the sideline. They're going all kind of over all these different formations and shifts they just did, and then you're really never going to call it the rest of the game and just get them working on something else. So I think you'll see something here in this game that'll be unique and be different. And I don't know. I'm just expecting it. I think they got to do it, and they got to show something different, do something different, and they got to find a way to get explosives and get a spark.
Jake, I tell you, I love your analysis and stuff like this. I think you're spot on, and you obviously know it so well. I appreciate you sharing that information with us here as a part of our Kroger Fresh Take. Best of luck to you guys. I know you're getting ready for a big Monday Night Football game there with the Detroit Lions. Hope all goes well with that. And, of course, hopefully the next time you and I speak, we're talking about a Georgia win at Alabama and keeping everything in front of them for the rest of the way. Won't that be a fun discussion? Jake, thanks for your time. We will look forward to talking to you soon.
That's right. Thanks, Brendan.
So great stuff from Jake Fromm. One of the things that I love, and I'll say this quickly because we need to wrap up, when you ask Jake a specific question about something that as a non-former player I really don't know the answer to, of how much do you save for the big games, I think that Jake gives a legitimate answer, like a specific answer to that. And I learned something from that. Davin the same way yesterday, Terrence this morning. John Stinchcomb, of course. I love our former players because they just give us just specific information that I think certainly makes me know more about the game. So I'm grateful to have them in our lives and, of course, as a part of our show. How about a golden shoe today? So Sam Wallace sent this to me. I don't know why I think this is funny. I guess because I like pro wrestling. But Kirby Smart holding a steel chair in his hand. I think that Georgia needs to play with a steel chair in its hand there on Saturday. Just that whack. You hope to see that there on Saturday for sure. That's the toughness that Georgia needs. Good stuff from Sam. We'll give him a golden shoe for that. Lousy, stinking Gators. Listen, they've taken all kinds of steel chair shots to the head and everything else too. It has been, and somebody told me this yesterday, and he's right. I always say 1,419 days. It does sound better to kind of drag it out and say 1,419 days. That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. That's our Gator hater updater. Well, we want them as miserable as they can be. And so far, that seems to be what it is. So good stuff. Y'all have a great day. Back tomorrow. DawgNation Daily presented by Merriweather and Tharp. Everybody stay safe. Stay out of the weather. And we'll see you back here tomorrow. Talk to you then, everybody. And on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. Showing up on time. Doing the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust all of that. So we're glad to have you here. We're going to take your comments. We're not going to go crazy long today. We've got, I want to get folks out of here. We got shows to take place. I got to figure out what's happening in my life right now. It's just kind of a mess. Just kind of a mess. Like I have so many unknown variables going on right now. Everybody does. So I'm not going to obviously bore you with that. But thank you. Wendell Brewer says a good show. Wendell, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'm glad that you're here, Wendell. Thank you very much. Al Chandler and Miriam talking about the wet ground and the wind. I hate that, man. I do. That wet ground and wind, when I was younger, I just was dumb, I guess, probably still am. Straight line winds is one of the scariest things I feel like you got to deal with. You know what I'm saying? It's people talk about tornado warnings, things like that. It's just really hard wind that I hate. I can't stand that. Hate, like, just really hard wind. Al Chandler says, this morning I already saw a wreck with a car upside down. Yeah, you got to be careful. You got to be careful. Cody Chafin's one of our producers, and I were talking about this. By the way, if you haven't seen Cody's hype video for Georgia, Alabama, it's really, really great. I love a fun hype video. I'm glad to see us back in the hype video business again. Cody's obviously an expert, I guess you call it like a videographer and an editor. Terrific at that. So he's puts together something really, really marvelous. But the point is, he and I were talking this morning, and the commute was much easier today because of there's very little traffic on the roads. Man, you gotta be careful. People just do dumb things when it rains. You just you gotta watch out for other people. You gotta be careful. You just gotta be careful. Gotta be careful. Miriam Corbin says, looking forward to seeing you this weekend, BA. I'll be at another invasion with you. Miriam, I can't wait for that. Really excited that you're going to be there, and hopefully we all have plenty to celebrate and enjoy. Hopefully that's the case. How about this? Rhodey Williams says Trent Thompson signed with the Columbus Lions Indoor Football League team. That's really cool. I'm glad to see Trent Thompson still playing. Also, I like indoor football. I mean, I don't know a ton about it, but I used to do a bunch of stuff with the Georgia Force back when they were here. Had some a lot of crazy things happened to me when I was younger. And a lot of that stuff kind of centered around Georgia Force games. Georgia Force is a little bit of a combination of like sports and like pro wrestling, which probably fits for me pretty well. Travis McCullough also wishing everyone to stay safe. Travis, I agree with you there on that. Mark Murphy over here at DawgNation.com says, we must be the more physical team, run the ball with success. I do think that's important. I think that some of how you throw it does make running a little easier. I think that's probably true. Let's see what else. A Yard Dog says, do you eventually see the SEC Big Ten forming their own league, own rules, etc.? There aren't many relevant teams outside those two conferences. I've said before that what my concern is a little bit is that, and this is like just like pontificating. This is not like based on reporting or inside information. But what I worry about is that if the Big Ten could add a couple of more teams and truly be what it would think of as a national league, that you may get to a situation where they don't want to play the SEC anymore because nothing good comes from playing the SEC if you're the Big Ten. Like, did y'all see what the ratings were for like USC, Michigan, Nebraska, Illinois on a Friday night? Like the Big Ten gets good TV ratings. You can say what you want to about anything, level of play on the field, things like that. What you can't say is nobody cares about Big Ten football. Those people in kind of the industrial Midwest, they like Big Ten football, and they watch the games on TV. These are relatively large fan bases, in some cases relatively populous states, and they watch their games on TV. So the thing I'm fearful of is because they have kind of a built-in TV audience, the last thing they want is their teams losing a bunch of games on TV, and so therefore let's try to avoid playing the SEC so we don't have to worry about that. That's my concern, is that it obviously seems like we're moving in a direction where the Big Ten and the SEC are very different than the rest of the sport, but also it could be one of those situations where the Big Ten also tries to kind of distance itself from the SEC because, frankly, in the games that matter most, those head-to-head matchups don't typically go the way of the SEC. I should say of the Big Ten. Randy Hall says the offensive line coming for Georgia this week needs to look like the Joe Moore Award winner. I like that for sure. Johnny Prescott says, good article from Connor this morning on how Georgia needs to use Jalen Walker to maximize pressure on Jalen Milroe. I believe he and Carson are the most important pieces Saturday. Big moment for Carson. We need him to deliver, beat Bama. Yeah, Johnny, I almost agree with you word for word. I thought that Connor had a great story on that. Connor and I talked about Jalen Milroe. We also talked about Milroe, but we talked about Jalen Walker when he joined the show on Tuesday. And as a pass rusher, getting the most out of him is going to be critical on Saturday. Over here on YouTube. Crow King 123 says there doesn't seem to be an incentive to play tough games anymore. He says, what was playing Clemson gain other than injuries? We certainly aren't getting any credit for it. I do think you need to put a pin in this and go back and look at what Crow King is saying here, because this is about to be a very telling year. And to begin with, I think Crow King's making a pretty interesting point that, hey, what's the purpose of playing a game like Clemson if they're not going to give you credit for beating Clemson? And they are literally not giving Georgia credit for winning the game. What's-his-face, Finebaum, doesn't even seem to remember the game. It was only like 3 weeks ago. So Crow King's right about that. Now, there was also something that Heather Dinich said this week, and I know that she's not, certainly many people's favorite. But she said something that I do think kind of goes along with Crow King here. She was talking about how it'll be interesting to see for a team like Georgia. Let's just use them as a for instance. Let's say that Georgia finishes with 10-2. 10-2, third best in the SEC, not making the SEC championship. Let's just say, for instance. What if there is a second Big 12 or ACC team? And right now it looks like there are two ACC teams in contention, Miami, Clemson. We don't really know about the Big 12 as of yet. That's a little bit of a difficult league to figure out. Utah got a very big road win last week at Oklahoma State. What if there's a second Big 10 team that's like 11-1 or something like that? Are they going to give Georgia credit for having played the tougher schedule? They've got more losses, but they played a tougher schedule in an obviously better league. In the past, the College Football Playoff Selection Committee has not done that. The committee talks a lot about we value tough schedules, things like that. But ultimately, what they typically reward are zeros in the loss column or ones in the loss column. Obviously, the Florida State example this year was the counterexample to that. This past year was the counterexample to that. But for the most part, the College Football Playoff Selection Committee has made what I call a quantitative and not qualitative analysis. They've simply counted the record more so than evaluating the performances. I think we all assume that they'll do differently this year because it's an expanded playoff and because the leagues are so obviously different. But honestly, I don't trust those guys, and it's mostly guys. I don't trust those guys to do anything. I don't. I don't trust their ability to do that, much less their willingness to do it. So we'll have to see. Crow King may be right. Crow King may prove to be right. Jonathan Aaron says, you said earlier I have a big head. What size do you wear? So I don't know what fitted hat I would wear. I'm guessing it's probably an 8. Because what I favor are like the snapbacks. I like snapback hats. And generally speaking, now I also have a tendency to have a lot of hair. I sort of make up for like not having a ton of hair right here by having a lot of hair right here. That also makes wearing a hat sometimes a little bit more difficult. But I typically on a snapback am about like the 2 snaps. I'm usually like about 2 snaps. There's one hat I got this summer from a golf course that I played at. I really liked. I was very happy about it. I got that thing on like the 1 snap where like it just barely stays buttoned and it's still too small. So if you want to know how big my head is, it's big enough that I can't wear some snapbacks. I can't wear them. So, yeah, unfortunately, a very big head. Foster and Spencer saying about an 8. It's probably an 8, which, I mean, if you go to, like, what's the store in the mall, Lids, what's that place called? They don't even sell 8s, right? Like, you can't even buy an 8 off the rack, right? They're not selling that in a store, are they? G. Grace also says the AP poll doesn't matter. He's focused on the college football playoff poll in November. But, G, here's also the thing to remember, and this is true whether you're a Georgia fan or an Alabama fan. We have also seen in recent years that listen, even if we know this is true, I'm still going to make a big deal about it because that's just what we do. But we've also seen that the week-to-week rankings of the committee don't bear much resemblance to the final ranking either. They do week to week whatever they want, and then they make a different series of decisions on the final week. It's literally people in power and in charge just making up the rules as they go along, which is unfortunately not the only case in life where that seems to occur. So I like the week-to-week rankings. This year they seem extra interesting because it is a 12-team playoff, but I'm guessing the same precedent holds where ultimately they don't have much to do with the actual final rankings. KC says he can't afford lids. I mean, I don't do a whole lot of lids shopping either. I'm sure you're not surprised to learn I don't really favor the flat build hats. So I guess I'm, to the extent that I buy hats, I buy them other places, I reckon. Yeah, there you go. There you go. That's me and Jalen Carter right there. We're going to have to share that big giant hat right there. See, the problem is that looks like comically large on him. It just looked like a hat. It would just look like a hat on me, unfortunately. That'd just be a hat. But yeah, that's what I need right there, Cody. That's exactly right. That's very funny. Very funny. All right, let's do a couple more and get ready to go. Spencer Clark says the best hats, the ones with the sweat stains. Yeah, I got a lot of those now. They get the ring, kind of around them. Although by the time they get that, I usually probably give them up. I also wear hats in the pool. I wear a hat in the pool because I'm trying not to get, sunburn on the top of my head because goodness knows I'm not fully covered right here. So I'm trying to wear the hat right there. And so that the chlorine from the pool messes up a hat something bad too. Let's see what else. Robert Fouquet says, we got a chance to see Robert the other day. He says, don't leave your future with the playoff committee. They can't be trusted anymore. Dogs take care of your future on the field. You can control it best by winning. Yeah, I mean, obviously that's Kirby Smart's mindset on that is he doesn't want to leave it in the hands of the committee. Now, I think you got to have a twin strategy of, as Robert said, absolutely don't trust them to do the right thing because it's not obvious they're capable. But if you do lose, to me, you're supposed to pivot right to arguing. And I don't think Georgia did enough of that last year. I think there are probably people in the building that wish that they would have argued a little bit more than they did. I think you do have to pivot to that. Jay Shipe's throwing it back. This is several gimmicks ago. Do y'all remember the winter and really almost into spring? I wore the scarf on the show every day. Do y'all remember that? That was one of many gimmicks we've employed from time to time. Glad to see people still remember. I wonder where the scarf is. We need to find the scarf. Gosh, please don't tell me I lost that. Surely I didn't. We need to find the scarf. Some of y'all remember that. Eagle Fang says I wear sneakers in the pool. I don't wear sneakers in the pool. Now, I don't love going, as you might imagine, someone, not exactly blessed with, one of these Georgia football style physiques. I don't love going shirtless to the pool. If I think that no one's around, I probably will, just because I do like being at the beach. But I don't love being shirtless. But I'm not wearing sneakers. It's really the only time I wear flip-flops. One of my general rules in life is, and if you're different, you have every right to be. I only wear flip-flops when I'm walking distance to water. Other than that, I try not to wear flip-flops. If you make a different decision, you have every right to do so. My fashion choices do not have to impact yours at all, but that's kind of the rule that I follow. I try to only wear flip-flops when I'm walking distance to water. String Gene says the Heisman is as much a curse as a blessing. Yeah, when it comes to being one of the prohibitive favorites to begin the year, we've often seen those guys not win the award. Crow King says he's lost 15 pounds. That's good. I need to lose 15 at least. So fat right now. Kathy Weaver Fuel says I wore the scarf out. I probably did. I need to find it though. I need to find that just for posterity's sake. Silver Britches says he wears his Crocs all the time. Yeah, my kids wear those nonstop. Senior Dog 54 says, who has a bigger hat size, BA or Kirby? Kirby doesn't have a big head, does he? I don't think of him as having an especially large head. Yard Dog says, well, what's the safe time to start drinking on Saturday? Well, I was about to make a joke, but let me not do that. Randy Hall says the scarf's wrapped around Eddie's head. Yeah. It's Eddie's had a hard time being seen. We need to get Eddie elevated a little bit to give him a little bit more camera time. All right, we're going to get ready to go. Got to get ready to go. Really good. There you go. How about some storm coverage? Look at this. You talk about like the level of special effects that sometimes we employ very late in the show is always really impressive to me. Look at me like calling for it. This is great. See, I think weather is where it's at. I mean, if you notice, like obviously, Cody's a longtime TV veteran. Like when the weather is bad, like the weather people, man, they are on call, which is probably not fun. But there's like 1,000 weather people that get employed by all these stations. Probably a pretty good job. Maybe I need to get involved with that. That's great. Look at me. I'm talking about. There's always got the turning point. Man, I love that. Well done there. Maybe I missed my calling as a weatherman. That's good stuff. A lot of weathermen have like really big heads. Scott Harris says, what's the record for DawgNation invasions? Not undefeated, unfortunately. We did lose in 2018 in Baton Rouge. And for the purpose of this, we're not going to count SEC championships as DawgNation invasions. So if we say that, only one L in DawgNation invasion history, that being Baton Rouge in 2018. But we still won the party, so that was a good time. So, yeah, pretty good record on invasions other than that, which is good. All right, we got to go. Good stuff. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. And, listen, they're out there still doing their stuff. You'll still see their trucks all over the place. Everybody else is kind of battening down the hatches, but in a safe and obviously, like a responsible way, RS Andrews is still out there taking care of folks. So make sure you find them online, rsandrews.com. If your water heater blows up, goes out, well, they'll get it replaced for you. Air conditioning unit, they'll keep you cool and comfortable. All kinds of storms sometimes bring electrical issues. If you've got, problem with your circuit breaker or something like that, I'm not even really sure. Just whatever could lead you to want to call an electrician, call our friends at RS Andrews online at rsandrews.com. All right, have a great day, everybody. Back tomorrow, big coverage. Also today, DawgNation at large. Cody's a part of it, but also Kaylee's what I meant to say. Kaylee and Connor, a lot of alliteration there. They got you tonight. DawgNation at large. That starts at 7 p.m. That's a really good time. Missed Before the Hedges last night. That's always great. We got Go with the Flow coming up on Friday, so all kinds of stuff. But today, a little bit of DawgNation at large. In fact, they're going to record that here in a little bit, so I got to get out of their way. All right, y'all have a good day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We'll look forward to talking to you then.